Record now to you. That's Luke's. And I'm going to record on this computer as well. Okay, today is February the 19th, 2022, and we continue our interviews of Luke Tripp by Azania Tripp. And I will hand it over to you, Azania.
Hi, so my first question is, Dad, you graduated in 1959 from high school from St. Catherine's School on the east side of Detroit, and you were a first generation college student. Can you tell us a little bit more about being a first gen college student? Because I'm sure there's a lot of narrative about what it means today and what did it mean for your family back in 1959 and what led you there.
Okay, well, what led me to seek a college career is the sort of tough conditions of being a poor working class black students during high school. And I realized in high school that if you were expected to have economic security, you needed a solid education, because I had worked as a teenager, young older men who did not have much education, and I saw how hard life was for them. So I saw education as a way of having of acquiring a job with economic security, and I felt that perhaps a professional job would provide more security than many blue collar jobs. So it's this observation and experience and recognizing the value of a college education that I pursued it. I did my, like my younger brother, for instance, although I was the first one in my family to go to college, I think that my younger brother, Lucius Tripp, who's about a year and a half younger than I am, would have pursued their college education if I had not. And then so he and I started the tradition of being an example of pursuing a college education in our family. Many of my peers, a few of my peers went to pursue a college education. None of my Black friends pursued a college education. And many of my classmates, and most of my classmates in the 10th, 11th, 12th, and the 12th grade were white students. And only a few of them pursued a higher education. Some had parents who owned small businesses. And then, of course, there were many trade opportunities that were high-paying jobs that many of them pursued. So,
did you find that most people in your neighborhood and the other white students that you were going to your high school with, were they going to trade programs, or could you tell us what those programs were?
Well, for instance, my classmate was Italian. He lived right across the street. He was a nice, friendly guy, and he had relatives who had small businesses. So when he graduated from college, he joined their businesses. You know, they were kind of small business folks. So that's one.
Do you remember what the family's business was that lived across the street from you?
Oh, I think, well, some were in produce. They had small stores, you know, and some of them were in small time real estate, and others were on civil service, like police departments, you know, went into areas like that. And then some were worked at, for instance, I worked at a chain food store, A&P Market, and many of them pursued higher positions because it was kind of open for uh, employees, white employees. For instance, I think that I was never encouraged to work my way up in the A&P firm. You know, I was a bagger, and there's just very limited Black workers in there. But for white students, they could pursue a path up to manager. And some did in those in those stores, in those occupations.
Do you have any adults in your life, in any areas of your life, that were um, providing you any guidance about higher ed or going to trade school, any kind of like after high school ideas? Do you have anyone in your life that was like telling you to go to college?
None.
Mm.
None.
So how did you motivate yourself and your younger brother to participate in college and also complete college? Because in your writings, you said that you had to be a part-time student. It looks like, did you do your first year of your undergrad at a community college and then you transferred to Wayne State your sophomore year in 1960? In 1960, is that kind of the path?
My first year of college, for my first year of college, I attended St. Benedict's College in Atchison, Kansas, which was an all-men's Catholic college. What happened is there were the Catholic schools kind of encourage Catholic students to go to Catholic colleges, and so these high schools will have catalogs of the various Catholic colleges across the nation. And so I got that catalog basically through the high school. They had these catalogs available. And what appealed to me regarding St. Benedict's College was that I knew I wanted sort of a secluded place. I was not interested in, social organizations, fraternities, sororities, and all. And I knew that I wanted a place where I could hunker down with my academics. And so, number one, it was all men's college. So that meant that there was no temptations for social activities, And it was like in a kind of a monastery kind of setting. And most of the fellow students were white male students from, many of them from all male high schools. So many of them went from more boys' academies in high school, and then went to a men's college, and that was their path. And I wanted to be at a place where there was discipline was fairly rigorous, things were well structured, and there was like a purpose of honing in on academics. So my first year was at all men's Catholic college, and I just explained why I chose that college.
So can you answer a couple questions? So in the writings that you provided me, you didn't mention that year of school. So just wondering why you didn't mention it in your writings. And it also sounds like my interpretation of not wanting social temptations. Do you interpret women as a distraction to your path of like higher education? Or because it seems like, again,
Mm-hmm.
when we were talking about Cuba, you
Mhm.
purposely are going to a school where there aren't any women. You seem to
Mhm.
keep it very separate.
Mhm.
Can you tell me a little bit about your relationships with women growing up? Because again, it just sounds like
Mhm.
there isn't, even though you're coming from a framework of socialism, it sounds like coming from
Mhm.
this community development framework,
Yeah,
not coming
right.
from individualistic, but
Mhm.
why aren't women a part of that philosophy
Mhm.
for you, or how do they fit in for you?
Okay, well, uh, during high school and at St. Ben's, of course, I didn't have girlfriends. I was attracted to girls, just like men my age. But for me, um, given the hard lessons of racism, I knew that I couldn't engage in a lot of social activities that other guys engaged in, So I,
I don't know what that means.
oh,
Just because that those are pretty I guess like now
mhm,
I think a lot of the time people like want to have balance, want to have a holistic
mhm,
experience in schools
mhm,
and their jobs. And a lot of people find their partners, particularly in the time period that you're at, they're finding it maybe in high school and yeah, and stuff like that.
mhm.
So can you tell me a little bit more of, just because you didn't have partners in high school, you still chose to be in environments that were predominantly men?
Right. Uh, I chose because, as I said before, the abrasiveness of social life. And and many of the guys I know who did a lot of dating, did a lot of partying, they had very unproductive futures. And I kind of recognized, I think I was perhaps mature regarding my age. I think that when my peers, many of them had a teenage mentality, and I think I had a sort of adult mentality. And when you have an adult mentality, you're thinking, and the first thing that comes to mind is not having fun, but prepare myself and behaving in a responsible ways. So for me, as I said before, just like other boys, my peers, I was interested in women and attracted to them, but I knew that going on dates cost money, and I was going to save that money for college rather than go on dates. So I didn't go on proms or anything like that. I became more and more focused, and I went to high school as a very angry person. Growing up, knowing how the indignities Black folks faced. And I thought that folks, you have to take yourself seriously, and because the society is seriously about oppressing you. Okay. So I know I had to prepare myself. So I didn't think I had the time to engage what you may call balance. My balance is already imbalanced there in terms of the degree of oppression, and I'm going to address it, and I'm going to prepare myself to be able to deal with it. And I saw myself as preparation. One of the reasons why I went to St. Ben's is like being in boot camp. When you're in boot camp and all that, you're preparing yourself like somebody going into the military. You're in training. So that's how I saw myself. I'm in training, I'm in preparation, and the other kinds of social activities that other people my age engaged in. I didn't think I had that much time for it. So that was low priority.
Mhm.
Although, I was, those things were appealing to me, but I tried to practice discipline and realizing that there were a lot of deficits in my education going through the public school system. And I had to kind of close that gap by myself, right? So I just, I kind of adopted a very responsible attitude, and I knew how significant education was. Yeah, I began to order my priorities, and education was number one. And the other things that other students engaged in, I wasn't interested in. Well, it's not that I didn't like, I didn't find those appealing, but I knew what my priorities were.
Mhm. So it sounds like, again, I feel like what I'm hearing is that women are connected to like social events, that they're connected to like parties, maybe. I feel like I'm still hearing like kind of interpreted as like distractions of taking away from an educational environment. And then also you brought up the point that it costs money to be in relationships. So you've shared a lot about your perspective on like capitalism. Do you see women as like as an idea of like capitalism, that there's something that they need to be supported? Because it's just interesting, because I think that there's that you didn't identify women as a resource, because there are, I mean, I'm assuming you've met women across your professional path that you've studied with and written with, and that women aren't products of just like for reproduction or for like romantic relationships, but that they're also very embedded in the movement as well. Because it seems that even though you know that a collectivist framework is essential, which you've talked a lot about with Cuba, but also it seems like you've worked very individualistically of kind of isolate, because it's also interesting of like, why did you pick a school in Kansas? Was there anything particular about like going to an out of state school, which is pretty common, and I think what's kind of pushed for higher ed. So I know I asked a couple questions, so do your best.
Okay, well, going for out of school, I wanted to go to a residential college. Right? And so that was another thing, that's why I didn't consider many in-state. And so it was out of state, it was residential, it was all male, and it's similar to like a military institution, because I was considering going to, I did apply to go to the military academy, right? And so maybe second back civilian will go to another all male institution, because I wanted a certain kind of rigor and a certain kind of mission, a certain kind of way I want to develop myself. So that's one of the reasons. Residential and plus an all male institution that is basically focusing on preparing oneself for a career, an activity, right? In the military, because I got the kind of sense that there's warfare on Black folks in this country, in America. So you better be prepared to deal in that kind of hostile environment. And then with regard to how I viewed women, no, I did not. I respected women's intelligence, and some of the smartest students in the classrooms were women. So I never thought that women were in any way intellectually inferior or anything. And I think now that's the cutting edge intellectuals are women, right? So I never had any notion in my. And then when I worked on a job, I had like when I was a bagger, they had like female cashiers, and in that department, the smartest employee at that store was a Black woman. She was a cashier. She could easily have been run several schools. I mean, those supermarkets. She was the smartest one there. So I never had any notions that, I couldn't learn from women or women were smart.
So can you tell us a little bit about because you've talked a lot about your male relationships. Can you talk a little bit about your female relationships growing up that you had?
Yeah, well, the females I had to deal with were my sisters, okay? And so my relationships with, well, number one, I cared about my sisters and loved them, but we did have some tensions. I have two older sisters, and the oldest one tended to be bossy and wanted to boss me around. And so that relationship was one of friction, right? Okay. And the other, and the second oldest sister, she was like my oldest sister's sidekick, right? She took orders from her, so, that relationship was not a cooperative one. We didn't collaborate or anything like that, right? So, but I love my sisters, and I felt a responsibility later on, in my adult life as a protector and a supporter of my sisters, because they're part of family. But we weren't buddy, okay?
What was your relationship with your mother, since you were the first male child in your family, and also the first child to go to college, and also you mentioned creating a legacy of all her children, eventually getting some experience in higher ed. Can you tell me a little bit about your relationship and how it changed throughout development, and her what were her perspectives on your activist identity?
Well, my mother was a, oh no, was a model of a mother. And she assumed that mother role to the max with all her children. I think her number one priority are her children. And she was, as, in a way, kind of a nervous type because she was always concerned about us, right? Because of love. So my mother was a very dedicated mother. And I have not, she's perhaps the hardest working woman in my life. She had to raise 11 kids during a time when I grew up, you know, in the 40s and the 50s. So she had to wash and clean 11 kids with no washing machine and all of that, and then raise us and teach us, you know, how to be good human beings. And she had very little social life herself, you know. She would not invest in herself. She would always invest in her children. So she was very dedicated in her role. And she was responsible for us. And so, you know, what I learned from her, well, she was a hard worker. I know what hard work looks like. Okay. And so I had a great deal of love and respect for my mother for what I know she provided us with things and put us first against her, before her needs. Being her oldest son, you know, sometimes when I was young, I didn't kind of understand. I were sort of kind of resented her always calling on me to do stuff. And I said, well, here's what I want. Why can't my older sisters do that? Why can't my other brothers do that? Why is Luke do this, Luke that? And then I, you know, all the funny understand is that she's the one that saw me as the most reliable, you know, like the most one that she could depend on. And so she always went to the one who she thought was the most competent and could get get things done. And so I became the go-to person when she was really something really had to be done. Okay. And so I always, you know, so our relationship was a very strong one and a very good one. I mean, later, you know, I would, you know, take her to work, pick up the work and all that. You know, she always called on me. And I depended on her too as growing up when she did odd jobs like taking in laundry and doing that for other folks to earn money. And she would, with the money she earned, she wouldn't spend it on herself. She would give it to the kids so we can go to the show on Saturdays, right? Go to the matinee. Okay, so she always kind of, you know, work hard for her children.
What other employment opportunities did you see her do growing up? So you said that she would take in laundry. Was that from the neighbors or was that from like other neighborhoods? And what neighborhood were you living in when you're talking?
Okay, well, we were in Inkster Village in, you know, this segregated area by the government. Government said, okay, all Black folks going to be living in this project. That means all Black folks. And so in our community in Inkster, our next door neighbors were professionals. The man next door had worked in a white collar job, and his wife was a school teacher. The next unit over, there were a postal worker and a teacher. So we had middle class Black folks, you know, in this working class kind of areas. And so since our next door neighbor, he had a white collar job, then my mother was take his laundry, you know, shirts and all, because he had that. So her first jobs of earning extra money was doing laundry for, you know, like middle class folks in the neighborhood. She just took that up. And so her next job is when we were in Detroit, she became a helper for some elderly neighbors, right? There was some elderly, you know, elderly, when we first moved, the elderly white neighbors. So she would go in there and do housework for them and all that because they could move around well. All right, so she did that kind of work. And then she got a job as as a nurse assistant at the hospital and cleaning up. And so, she was always looking for opportunities to work because as we hear, she work. That's what she's about and all that. So those are some of the jobs that she held.
And what was it like to tell her that you were going to go to college and that you're going to go out of state?
Mhm. Well, I never had a lengthy discussion with my parents about, things I was going to do. I just said, so I didn't discuss, hey, Mom, I'm going to St. Benedict's College and describing the college and all. I never had that conversation. I'm going to college, and that was it. I didn't describe anything further. I didn't talk about what I intended to major in, right? And what my long range career goals. I didn't have those kind of conversations with my parents.
So one thing that's kind of that's very common now, and it's been common for quite a while, is that families usually celebrate very highly, like particularly first generation students, because they're the ones that are going to create economic change in their family.
Mhm.
So since you weren't discussing what you were going to, what your plans were, what were your parents and your siblings' understanding of college? What do you think they understood that to be? Did they see it as a resource? Were they, were they interested that maybe are wanting to go to a trade school to make money to help out? Was that
Mhm.
a family obligation? Was it, since you said you had 11 brothers and sisters, was that a
Mhm.
responsibility that you had to take on, which was a
Mhm.
financial support for your family?
My parents never sort of uh, push or encourage us to go to any particular profession, right? So it's not like, why don't you become a doctor or why don't you become a lawyer? It was never that kind of talk, pushing for that. Of course, they were very proud that I went to college, and then jump up and down, say hooray and all that. So they were just, I knew um, um, I knew it made them feel good, that their kids were going to college and all
How
that.
did you know
So,
it made them feel good, since how did they express that to you, that you had that understanding?
well, it was something that was vocalized much. And go up there and say, okay, here's a cake. Yay, yay, yay. He's going to college.
Yeah,
We
so
didn't
what
have-
did they do? So you're saying that that's not, you're
Okay, it
telling me
was
what they
just
didn't do.
and right.
What did they
All right. It was just silent. And I mean, we didn't have to articulate anything or just
do?
feel it and just feel that they did.
Okay, how did that feeling, what did it feel like? And where did that feeling live in your body?
That was a feeling of, well, it was, I don't know, I describe it as uh, a just a family. Was difficult for me to describe because it's something that's kind of silent. I mean, my mother and I and father, we didn't do a lot of hugging. I wasn't a huggy kind of person and all of that. So, I just, um, I just show my respect and my love by doing things. For instance, whatever my mother wanted, so like sometimes when she had a job at the hospital, uh, I would, you know, that, so she got off at 10 or 11 o'clock or something like that. And, I can't be hanging out late at the parties, 10, 11. No, I gotta go pick up my mother, right? I gotta take my mother in the morning. I have to take her to work, right? To get her in the bus. So those were my duties. And I wasn't gonna let anything interfere with that in terms of social activities. Okay. So it was expressed in terms of what I consider my duty as a son, to help my parents because what they have done, they provided for me. Mhm. So yeah, um, yeah.
Your responsibilities as a son that you just mentioned, can you describe that a little bit more?
My responsibilities as a son. All right, I'm the son and I'm the oldest. I'm the oldest of the sons. So I had kind of responsibility, and my parents kind of expected me to provide a model in the discipline for my younger brothers.
Can you describe what that model and discipline was?
Well, number one, growing up, if any, I had to protect them from other boys who wanted to beat them up, because I got in a couple of fights when some of the, boys were picking on them, so those kind of things. And
Were you all winners or losers? How did the
But-
fights go?
oh, the fights. Oh,
Mhm.
I remember one I lost. Yeah. Okay. I mean, I didn't get into it because, it was a winning situation for me.
Mhm.
But
What happened in the fight that you felt like you lost?
well, in this case, I mean, I'll just tell you, the guy was bigger than me, right? And all that. So
How old were you?
yeah, maybe let's see, I was maybe about around the sixth grade, fifth, sixth grade, probably. Because it happened in Easter. So I know it happened there. Because
Was this with
we
your
didn't move from
brother
Easter until I was in
Lucius?
the
The
seventh
one
grade.
that was this with your younger brother?
Yeah.
Bradley?
I think it was Richard and James.
Hmm.
And then a lot of boys would pick on Lucius too, because he was, Lucius was kind of a nerdy guy. And, at that point, he wasn't really kind of athletic. So, sometimes, some guys would try to pick on him.
Did anybody pick on you?
Not often. I mean, I wasn't a tough guy, right? I wasn't one of the toughest guys in the classroom. I would say if you gave a grade based on fighting ability or, whose reputation, I was probably around B minus. I went in the A category, that's for sure.
Mhm.
And
So with the
so it was enough that I wouldn't be overly harassed, right? Okay. So
would your brothers talk to you about when they were being bullied or being abused in school? Would they go up and talk to you, and then you would go up with them and beat up these other kids? Is that
there weren't many occasions, but usually it's things
when it would occur? How would they communicate to you that they needed
okay.
your help?
Well, the only times I got into fracas was when I observed it, because my younger brothers, they didn't have a habit of coming up and say, this boy is threatening me. No, it wasn't that. It's things that
So
I
where
ended
did
up
you
observing.
usually see it?
Usually out, well, we lived in the projects, so it'd probably be in some open space, because it was kind of semi-rural. Okay, I mean, it wasn't like in the city streets and things like that. So it'd probably be in open spaces. But no, my brothers, I don't remember any of them at any time asking me for protection. Yeah, it's just things, and I don't recall them getting too many scuffles anyway. I mean, so the kind of fights protecting them were very few. Yeah.
Okay. So how did you talk to your younger brother Lucius about college? Did you tell him to go, or was that his own objective of something that he wanted to do?
That was his own objective. Lucius and I, we were in the same math class. I was in the same math class. We were in algebra and also in geometry. But in those classes, we never worked together even on one problem. Okay? So we didn't collaborate. He did his thing. I did his thing, right? So
do you wish you would have collaborated or like spent more time together at all? Or because again, you're spending time alone, right? Doing the same activity.
No,
Mhm.
You know, I mean, you know, I always visited Lucius and came, you know, I got closer to him, but we did things together as brothers, but uh, you know, growing up in high school and all that, we weren't buddies. Hey, Lucia, we didn't have a buddy relationship,
Mhm.
and we had maybe a closer kind of relationship, you know, after you know doing it after college. But growing up, uh, no, I mean, we were Boy Scouts together. We had to do things together because of certain kind of arrangements. But and we had mutual friends. One mutual friend, because Lucius was into models and putting things together, like ships and boats, you know, places that you had to put them together, in planes and and trains. And so we have another very close friend, Charles Brown, who was also into, you know, doing hobbies about putting things together. And that was part of my hobby. So on the basis of mutual hobbies, that you know we kind of interacted and worked together. Okay, so that was yeah.
So was it easier since you're not having like buddy relationships with anyone in your family, but you feel very close to them? And so then when you go away for college out of state for a year, what was that like being away from your family?
Well, I knew why I was there, you know. So uh, I didn't have I didn't have a severe case of homesickness. You know, I miss my family, but I knew my purpose would be in there. Right, as I said before, you know, if I had gone into the military, I would be away from the family, you know, in training. So, you know, it was 9 months, right? And going through the semester, so I tried to focus, right? And I had you know, I know, and when I was in St. Ben's, Lucius had a very serious accident, you know, playing football. He had a serious concussion, and he was hospitalized. His head swelled, and you know, I was very concerned about that. So yeah, he was in very bad shape for a long while. You know, suffered severe
So
concussion.
that one of the reasons why you ended up transferring to Wayne State University and moving back home because of the accident with Lucius,
No,
your brother.
no,
Okay.
transferred to Wayne State because although St. Benedict's College, it wasn't a very vibrant, stimulating kind of environment. All right, I went there because I needed a little, you know, kind of like isolation, you know, to hone down on some academic skills, you know. But you know, there was virtually no political activity. The kinds of discussions it was with the students, they were really kind of mainstream. Here we are in Kansas. They come from conservative Catholic homes, right? And so there was not any vibrant stimulation in terms of the things I was interested in. And then plus one was finances, you know. So I went to college. I had what they had, a national defense student loan. So I went on a loan program. And when I was at St. Ben's, I coupled that loan with work study because I worked in the dorms as a janitor. You know, in other words, I cleaned the bathrooms, I collected the dirty laundry, and I kept the floors. Yeah, I mean floors in the dorm rooms clean. So that was my job. Okay. And so I wanted to, so because of the financial thing, I thought it would be less expensive going to a public institution, you know, and living at home. And then plus, I wanted to, in one way, the atmosphere was kind of stifling, you know, for me to really expand and grow. So in St. Ben's, I mean, we have almost mass almost every day, before you go to lunch and all that. And it's kind of in a rural kind of setting, because it was a campus, golf campus, hardly anything happening. Okay. But I knew that, so it was right for me for that particular purpose, right? And so I transferred in Wayne State, and that was much more stimulating, possibilities for growth, the ideas in the mix of the student body, because you're in a Catholic. Look, you had all kind of things that were the same. People there with the same religion, people there the same gender, right? People there, so it's kind of you're on almost like a little dogmatic box. Okay.
So what made you apply to Wayne State? Because there's so many colleges and universities in Michigan. So can you tell us a little bit why Wayne State? Was it like location? Was it affordability? Why Wayne State? Did you have friends that were already attending school there? Why that school?
Okay, number one, I didn't know anybody at Wayne State University, so that's out. Economically, that was a big reason, right? That living at home and catching a bus and go to the university. And I knew that Wayne State had a good academic reputation. Okay. So I wanted, to go to a high quality institution. Wayne State was, and it was affordable, more affordable than living on campus, because I didn't even consider going to the University of Michigan or Michigan State or Western Michigan, all those other, like residential universities. And that's probably one of the reasons is if it's residential, it's going to cost more, right? So it was the cost factor. And then there's what was attractive about Wayne State is that it had a good reputation and it's something I could afford.
How far away did you live from the university? How long was your bus ride?
It was about 4 or 5 miles. It took about 40 minutes. Yeah, because the bus stops, goes, and all that. So en route took me about 30, 40 minutes.
And so then once you started your sophomore year in 1960 at Wayne State University, you were there as occasionally, sometimes a full-time student and sometimes a part-time student.
That's correct.
And what kind of work were you doing as a student at that time, or to afford to be a student at that time?
Okay. Well, I got a campus job cleaning. I worked for food services, and my job was to mop and keep the floors clean in what they call the commuters lunchroom. Kids come get busted in and eat their lunch and all. So I had to clean up. I had to wipe the tables and keep the dining room clean. So that was my first job working for the university. And then I had a job. After that job, I got another job working in a library, shelving books, collecting books, shelving books. Right? And then a final job I was working as an assistant to a professor in math education. And I would do little computer programs, repair computer cards, and run them over to the computer center to get the printout, whatever I was instructed to do by him in his damn minutes projects. So those are 3 jobs. I had a janitor job, a library job, and a aide for a math professor in education.
Did you also
I had
have work?
I had off campus jobs later.
Okay, can you tell us a little bit about your off-campus jobs?
Okay, one off-campus job. It was of short duration, maybe about 8 weeks, and it was with a company that boxed school materials. So my job was to take these school materials and put them in a box and prepare the box for shipment. Right. So that was one job. I had another long-term job as a post office worker. You know, was worked for the post office. My job, you had this big postal terminal, and that's where the mail cars on trains would come in. And uh, it- we were assigned to do different things. Uh, Most of my jobs was sitting and sorting mail. You know, you sit in there and you mail them according to the zip code. My second most often the job I most often did was unloading mail bags from the train cars. So we go into these box cars with all these bags of meals, and so we would have to take them from the rail cars and throw them onto like a lolly or trolley and or a small carriage with wheels. And so that was another job. And then there was another job that materials were going down a conveyor belt, mostly magazines, and you had to sort, you had to get the magazines to put them in smaller boxes, you know, so you have these tray boxes and then you send them there for sorting. So some of them were kind of more physical work and some were just sitting in there, just sorting mail. So those were the three jobs I had. Those are, then I had another job around Christmas uh, at a department store, Hudson's department store. And that was like a Christmas job. And I was a clerk over in a section where they sold things like beer steins and things like that, you know, okay. And other little sort of trinkets. So that was another off-campus job I had. And sometimes I was working at least two jobs and going to school at the same time. For instance, through the week, when I worked on a campus, you know, job, maybe say, for instance, at a library job, and the post office job was on Saturday or Sunday. So I was going to school, working on my campus job, and then working part-time at the post office on the weekends. See, just like my mother, workaholic, okay? And so you can see, if I'm going to school, working these jobs, and in taking, and I was in math and science, these rigorous courses that requires a lot of time, that automatically shut out a lot of social activity, you know, dating, all that. They didn't have time for that. You know, I had to basically do it. I had these other responsibilities.
So in your employment that you had outside of your education programs, what did the community look like that you were working with? Were they other like college students that were also trying to pay for their schooling and housing and other like bills, or were they, who were these people that you were working with, like at the post office and in the on the train and stuff like that? Who were your
Okay,
coworkers?
okay. Well, many of the co-workers at the post office, most of them were full-time workers. I was a part-time worker, okay? And most of them were, they were adults, and many of them had college degrees. But like in the 60s, one of the most desirable jobs for Black people was to work at the post office because it was a federal job and it offered security, and the wages were generally higher than they were in other jobs, right? So it meant a lot of security, a lot of benefits, you know, went with that job. And then, of course, many of the corporations and all didn't hire a lot of these Black graduates. So they would shoot for public sector jobs. And a public sector job, one big public sector job was in the post office. So you went to post office and all who worked there. It was basically, that was a middle-class Black job. That was a middle-class Black job. You know, those students, Blacks who didn't go to college, but were good students in high school, that's where they went, you know, because they could pass the exam, you know, and get the job. Okay. So, and it was a desirable job.
know we're almost at time. Is there anything you would like to share that I didn't ask about, or anything you want to elaborate on that you talked about previously?
Mm, Well, most of the, like my fellow students, the ones, I was around most, a couple of them lived on the east side and catching the bus. And they were like, so those were my closest friends in college, were the Black students from working class homes, catching a bus, working these odd jobs. And most of them, well, some of them, uh, a few of them were members of fraternities, right? And so they were kind of in the social things, but most were not in fraternities or sororities. They were just, just trying to struggle and get their degrees, right? Some of my closest friends they were in engineering and math. So if you're in engineering and math, that's a whole different kind of program. And folks who had time to do the social things, they're in the School of Education. So if you're in the School of Education, and as opposed to if you're in the engineering school, that's a big difference. And you don't find too many in the engineering school going to these social events and all that. No, they're into, maybe they're into arts or education, and where, it didn't have that kind of demand on your time and your energy.
Thank you.
Okay. Maybe we'll get to Uhuru on the next go around.
Yeah, I think it's nice to know like prep of what led you to
Mm-hmm.
room.
Okay, now I think I better stop recording here.